Let's start off with a guy that is very, very active in our CLP Discord, longtime subscriber. So you got a hand for us here, Graham, and where is this one played out of?
It's almost a joke at this point. There's a bunch of players in my 2-5 pool and a dealer or two that make fun of my previous call-ins, but this is from Caesars, Southern Indiana.
Caesars, Southern Indiana.
Biggest game that runs here is usually going to be a 2-5, 1K cap match half the stack game, and that's what we're playing here. For this hand, we're going to be 1,300 effective.
All right, so 1,300 effective, 1K cap, okay.
Usually this game is kind of loose and splashy, a lot of, limping going on. This hand, somehow it actually folds all the way to me on the button, and I open 10-7 of diamonds to $20.
So hero on button, 10 of diamonds, 7 of diamonds to 20. I'm assuming this is probably some of the bottom part of your opening range here, Graham. Would you open?
Not even particularly close.
You mean you open far more hands than this, or it is the bottom?
Yeah, it's probably not necessarily optimal, but I mean, from the button, I'm probably opening nearly 70-80%.
Oh, okay. I know that's going to come into play because I know what's going to happen here. Just keep that in mind, because I was going to ask you, would you open 10-6 suited? Like, where's your cutoff? But we'll move this along, and I'll come back to why I'm going to ask you that. So you go to 20 from the button, okay? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the small blind, I haven't played a bunch with him, but he's become kind of a more consistent, regular player, kind of a younger guy. Seems like he plays somewhat decently. 3 bets out of the small blind to 70, big blind folds, and it's back on me.
So small blind 3 bets to 70. Now, it's just a 2 blind format, right?
Yep.
No straddle, no ante, something like that. But even still, you really should be playing. You said he's solid. I mean, I don't really see a flatting range here. Like, if I put myself in that spot, button versus small blind, it gets even more extreme, accentuated when there's like 3 blind, there's a 3 blind, like mandatory straddle or 3 blind game, and you should always be playing a 100%, probably 3 better fold strategy from the small blind. So he goes to 70, and, so at this point now, the pot is what, like 95, and it's like 50 to call. You're getting maybe like 2-1 in position.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the primary reason why I called this hand is we have a mutual friend, Tony, and this is his favorite hand. So it's kind of become a bit of a meme in our friend group that we play this hand whenever we can. So that comes into part of it. Kind of sound like a total fish.
Obviously, when I saw this like right away, I'm like, oh, this is a fairly easy fold. The only thing I'm going to say here for everyone in the chat saying fold and move on, is when you take a look at the math of a certain situation, depending on how large the 3 bet is, he's getting 2-1 in position. If you were to look at a clump of hands, this is how you try to figure out what you want to defend with from each position. Say, for example, you were under the gun and you were only opening like 15% of hands, right? And somebody made a 3 bet and you wanted to defend given pot odds like 50% of your opening range. It's actually usually more than that with position. Then it would be like 7.5% of total hands. If you say that you're opening 70% of your holdings here on the button, which in itself might be too wide, and you wanted to defend with, say, 60% of those holdings, then you'd end up calling here with like upwards of 40% of total hands and 2/3 of, 50% to 2/3 of what you're opening. If you really are opening that many hands, 10-7 of diamonds, it could be in there as a bottom part of a defend. The only thing I will say though too is that people would be surprised at how exponentially worse you can flop as a gap in your hand goes up, meaning like a direct suited connector is good. Then you get to a 1 gapper and it gets worse, and then you get a 2 gapper and it's even worse.
Yeah, and I also think having a 10 isn't the best. I mean, because a lot of the small blind range is going to be a lot of Broadway cards, pairs and some suited aces. So, I mean, in my opinion, it's probably better to have a hand like 4-6 suited than like 10-7 suited.
You mean that just doesn't interact, with the 3-bang range as much?
But obviously 10-7 can flop more top pairs than like a card.
Right, it has more.
With 6 is your highest card, so.
Right, it has more high card value. All right, I'm going to call it 140 because there's probably rake to the... I assume you called, right?
Yeah, I call.
All right.
It'd be a
140
four bet
here.
would be a little fun, but I don't think we're.
Yeah,
I don't think that's the best idea.
that would be a little bit fun. So 140 here to the flop, okay?
All right, and so the flop comes eight of diamonds, seven of spades, four of hearts.
8 of diamonds, 7 of spades, 4 of hearts. So obviously you flop middle pair, backdoor diamonds. It's a raggedy board. You got some backdoor straight draws going on here too. Okay. 8, 7, 4. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure whether this guy's three betting pocket sevens. I'm almost certain to say he's not three betting pocket fours. So I mean, I have more sets and straights than he will. He might have 7-8 suited. I feel like this board he has more of the good overpairs. I have maybe more sets, more straights, more draws. So he goes ahead and he bets out for 80, which is just over half pot.
Yeah, that's a little bit of an interesting sizing here. So small blind bets 80. It gets really, really complex as you move the ranges like to become wider and wider. I mean, it's much easier to sort of almost know the right answer in a much tighter configuration, like under the gun open, small blind 3 bets, much, much tighter to look at a board and how it interacts with those ranges. When you're playing a situation where you're opening 70%, defending, with like 2/3 of that range, you have just a ton of hands. And then the question though becomes, is the small blind adjusting to the amount that you're opening? Where does he have the 5-6? I mean, I would think that he would 3-bet 7-7 and 8-8. So that's where like the sizing sort of gets reflected here a little bit, because you could say, well, I've got the nut advantage in position. The small blind might counter and saying, I'm 3-betting all pairs here against a button open and 5-6 suited. So no, you don't. I have just as much nut as you do. So it's interesting, sometimes when you see flops that would traditionally say like a small sizing, a lot of that stuff gets changed as you expand the volume of hands that can be in both ranges. All right. Seems to me like a pretty standard call here to this type of sizing. I mean, if he went really tiny, you could make a case sometimes for raising actually here for a little bit of protection / value, but
I think raising is still potentially okay. I don't expect to get bet 3-bet, too
right.
particularly often. I ended up just calling here. I mean, I have a lot of showdown. I beat all the, the whiffed types of hands. So I just ended up calling here. I think you can raise, but I think calling's fine too.
Right. So hero calls. And again, so JP Scott in the live chat says, great flop. We have the nut advantage. Right. You would have the nut advantage, I think, and you still maybe can make the case for that. But if the small blind is 3-betting 5-6 because of the wide configuration, then he actually has the nut advantage more. I mean, just as much nut advantage types of whole or strong hands than the Graham does here on this particular board, especially if he's 3-betting all the pocket pairs. That's the point that I was trying to convey. So, all right, 300, right?
Yep, 300. Turn is the 6 of diamonds.
Oh, this gets really interesting now. So the turn's the 6 of diamonds.
And the small blind bets 150.
Yeah, I was going to say, this gets really interesting. So he goes half pot, kind of half pot. It's really interesting, again, because it's a one-liner out here to a 5, right? So again, from a tighter configuration, this would almost be always reflected with a check, right? From the out-of-position player for the most part.
You would think so.
Right. But the ranges are wider, but it's still usually going to be reflected here, with a check. You pick up backdoor diamonds now, and you have a pair, but it's a weird little spot because if you say, like, what do you think the small blind's like betting range here is like on this turn card?
I think it should be a set or 10-9 or 5x. I mean, that's maybe some 2-pair like 7-8, 6-7. But I mean, whenever he bet this card, I was pretty surprised.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that 2-pair and sets always bet here with a one-liner out here to a 5?
I mean, I think 8s and 7s can keep betting because I mean, I can still have 2-pair like 6-7,
right.
Pocket 6s, and they have equity if I have like 5x or. Obviously the dream scenario is I flopped the underset of 4s or whatever. So I think, top set and middle set can keep betting. Obviously, I think, I honestly, I feel like his 5x would want to maybe try and check and go for the check raise or, it could keep betting. But it just seemed like a weird spot for him to just take a hand like queens, jacks, 10s, those types of 1-pair hands and continue to bet. I thought it was odd.
I agree with you that overpair should not be betting here. And I think that's a pretty good thought that sometimes you actually might want to check a 5 here, especially against somebody that's a decent player in position, because not only would you possibly value own yourself across 2 streets, Graham, like if you had 2-pair or if you had a set yourself when the guy checks, there is 9-10 that's out there as well. So I don't think 5x is always a bet here. Now, with that being said, again, as I look at the live chat, because some people said, well, oh, what a great spot to raise. But when you actually think about, and I agree with Graham's assessment of what the small blind's betting range here should be, I don't think it makes a ton of sense to raise. It's almost like a little bit of a polar spot. Like if he's running a backdoor bluff with diamonds, although, Graham does have diamonds, and then sort of the value portion of his betting range beats Graham. I mean, you're really talking about turning your hand into a bluff here against a strong kind of value range, which doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
Even if he has 5x and we run into it, we still have the 9 for the higher straight. We still have our diamond draw. So we have equity if we were to potentially raise against a 5x type of hand. I just thought for him to be double barreling here was pretty strong. And also the stack depth is kind of odd. Like I think, we have another 1,000 behind this bet. So any raise size would probably be a jam. So it is kind of awkward for stacks to try and find a non-all-in raise size here.
Right. And then if you raise, I don't think anybody's folding a 5 here. You know what I mean?
I don't think anybody's folding a 5, but maybe he folds a set or 2 pair, which would be pretty cool. In game, I thought that his double barrel was extremely strong. Like I was absolutely shocked to see him come out and bet, although he does only bet half pot. But yeah, I thought the bet was very strong.
Yeah, I think that all those things like lean towards a call, right? Because you have to ask yourself, why are you raising? If you're going to semi-bluff raise, you have to be able to get a better hand to fold, right? And if you think of betting, that the line itself is extremely strong, then probably calling here and taking your equity, I think, is the play. Especially too, if sometimes he has some bluffs, because it's not like you don't have a pair here. It's not like you've got like Jack 10 of diamonds or something like that, right? So small blind bets 150. So hero calls. And now the pot is 600 and you guys have what, like 1,000 left, right?
Yep.
Okay.
River is the 2 of diamonds, so we backdoor the flush.
All right. So I'm going to want to repeat the board for the podcast people, because this is always very important on flushing boards that come in on the backdoor side. 8 of diamonds, 7 of spades, 4 of hearts, 6 of diamonds, deuce of diamonds. So top pair and a flush draw is not possible. Of course, Graham has middle pair on the flop, so that's not possible. So the only sort of pair plus flush draw that could be possible here would be 4x of diamonds. Of course, he could have 5x of diamonds, something like ace 5 of diamonds, but you really want to look at the flop distribution when you're trying to evaluate what to do on backdoor flushing boards. Of course, Graham makes a backdoor flush. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess his bluffs would primarily be centered around like Jack 10 or like diamond types of hands. So if he had like King Queen of diamonds, King Jack of diamonds, King 10 of obviously I have the 10 of diamonds in my hand. So if he had like Jack 10 without diamonds, or like King X of diamonds, Ace X of diamonds, I guess those are his primary kind of bluffing hands.
Are those hands even supposed to continue, though, on a bluff with a 1-liner to a 5, though? I don't know off the top of my head. Putting it, a solver's not magic. It just puts in the ranges and try to figures out. But I still think the turn is checked a fair amount, and maybe like the turn types of draws that he would want to bet were hands that consisted of 9x. Don't you think that makes more sense? Yeah. On 8, 7, 4, 6. All right. Rivers, deuce, diamonds, you make backdoor flush.
And he bets 325.
And now the small blind bets 325. So, obviously he's showing a fair amount of strength. If you were to call, the pot would be 1250, and then you would have about 700 left. So I always look at this like if you shove, we talk about this concept of CLP reverse pot odds, the pot would be what, like 2,000-ish, 700 for him to call, something like that. So he'd be getting close to 3-1 if you shoved. I assume you probably went through that thought. But you're thinking about calling or raising all in here, right, Graham?
Yeah, I ended up...
Let's, before you tell us what you do, again, I'm trying to take a look at this, because if you think that your villain is going to call with like 5x here, we talked about what he was betting like here on the turn, or like 9, 10, and I think a lot of people would at this level, then it just allows you to sort of liberally more shove. And again, I would look at reverse pot odds. I mean, I'm all for going for.
I thought he was funneled to strength by tripling off here, which just made me think that shoving was good because you get called by 10-9 and 5x and potentially a set. Although I'm not sure about a
Wow.
set whenever every draw comes in. I mean, his betting action has been so strong. I thought that shoving would be the right thing to get called by the straights. Although he can certainly have some flushes that get here. So it's not like he can ever have a worse flush than me based on the card distribution.
And then also too, to like get into the weeds of it too, when I talked about like the 9x types of holdings, like a 9x of diamonds type of holding, continuing to bet turn. It's interesting that you have like the 10 of diamonds in your hand, because then it kind of just leaves Jack 9 of diamonds, or if he's like going, obviously Ace 9 of diamonds. I don't know if he's 3-betting King 9 or Queen 9 of diamonds. Seems to be a little bit light. The 8 of diamonds is out there. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. If you think straights and stuff here are going to call, it's just, I can't imagine a set taking this line though. It would be pretty bizarre. But at this level, if you give your opponent 3-1, I think it's a lot closer than it looks on the surface. And I'm trying to think if it is somewhat player dependent and how good I think that my opponent is here, and how, is your opponent ever, do you think your opponent is betting a 5 here 3 times when the backdoor diamond comes in?
I think they would bet it 3 times, but I'm not necessarily confident he would call the river raise.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if you can't get called by worse, it doesn't make any sense to jam.
Well, right, because I mean, the pot odds get flipped around, right? I mean, when the guy's betting 325 into 600, you're getting 3-1. You need to be good 1 out of 4 times. But if you put extra money in, it's almost like a dry side pot on the river. Like when you get checked to on the river, right? You can check behind and take your equity in the pot. Same thing when someone bets into you and you're deciding whether or not to raise or to call. You have to be called more than 50% of the time with the worst hand for it to be profitable. So it's really 1-1. Question is that not only do you have a better hand, do you have the best hand more than 50% of the time, but do you have the best hand and it's going to get called more than 50% of the time? I think it's pretty close. So what did you end up doing?
Yeah, so I ended up shoving for 675 more, which, whenever that river came off before the small blind acted, I figured I was probably going to be all in. But honestly, like with the fact he can have so many higher Broadway flushes, and I have, it's not like he ever has a worse flush, and him calling, he would have to call my shove with 5x in order for it to be a good shove. I'm not so potentially sure it was a great, value jam, but I did end up shoving.
And then did you get called?
He snap folds face up pocket kings with the king of diamonds.
Oh my God.
I mean, I was in disbelief that he tripled off with that hand, but I thought it was interesting. And maybe if you have time to touch on this, afterwards he said, he just made this comment where he said, "Oh, I know you like to call." And I was like, well, that's a very interesting comment for you to kind of expose your thinking on the hand. Because if he thinks I like to call and he's taking a hand like kings and betting it 3 times for what he thinks is value, then I'm wondering what you think that means about potentially flop, turn, maybe finding earlier raises in the hand, how you would adjust to a player who's trying to potentially exploit you.
Well, I think it is different, though. If he thinks that you like to call, that's different than if you raise at some point or earlier, right? And to get in that guy's head, I think maybe he thought, which sometimes will have some merit, that you might have a hand like 10-8 here or pocket tens and think that his line is so strange that it's almost like a mergey bet right at the end.
Right.
Like, what would you do with like tens here with the 10 of diamonds? Would you call him down the whole way? Right?
As me, that's honestly, I'm not sure whether calling the river or jamming the river would be better there.
Well, I don't know if you knew that he was betting with kings 3 times, maybe jamming to turn your hand into a bluff is better, but I never would have thought that would be the case. But my point is that I think the things change. If he thinks you call too much, I don't know, and then you raise, that on an earlier street, that changes the action, right?
Right.
So I don't know if it would say that you should raise like on an earlier street if he thinks you call too much. And
I just couldn't believe he took that hand for 3 bets.
You know what it might suggest is you actually taking some hands that you would raise with and actually just calling with them, almost like as a slow play.
10-9.
Yeah, just almost as a slow play because he's making these mergy like value bets because he thinks you're a station in some way. That's the adjustment to make based off that comment. But thank you very much for the call, Graham. I appreciate it.